Good evening. I'm Daniel Smadgers, the Maccabi Canada, and welcome once again to Frontline Access. We're so excited tonight because we have with us former history lecturer turned baseball scout for the Cincinnati Reds, Mr. David Friedman. David, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
So first I got to say is that your profile picture, the headshot in that intro, is probably the coolest one we've had. You with the shades on.
Yeah, I worked hard on that. You know, part of baseball is just looking good. So I worked hard on that one.
So as I just teased, you are a history lecturer, and then you became a scout for the Cincinnati Reds. So take us through this transition. How did it get started? How did you get started in scouting?
Well, it really was kind of a fluke, and you know, sometimes I have to pinch myself to even believe the story. But here's what happened. And I think it was 2013, the Maccabi Games. You know, the Olympics were in Israel, and of course, baseball is one of the sports. So, being that I have coached a lot of the guys who were on the Israeli team, I was going to go and watch the games. So, I have a friend who's a coach with the Cincinnati Reds. And I wrote him, I said, listen, if I see anybody who looks like he's got a lot of talent and could make it to Major League Baseball, would you like me to tell you about him and give you just a little report on him? And he said, sure. And so sure enough, through the tournament, I saw two guys that really impressed me, both on the American team. And I wrote up a little scouting report of them. And I said to myself, what the heck? Why bother my friend with it? Why don't I just send it to the front office of the Cincinnati Reds? You know, they can look at it. So I did that. And I didn't expect to hear anything back. And I think in about 3 months' time, I got a letter in the mail, and I opened it, and I honestly thought somebody's pulling my leg. Because I opened it, and it said, Dear Mr. Friedman, we really like the scouting reports you sent us. How would you like to be an international scout for us? So again, I just kind of shook my head. Who's doing this to me? And when I looked down for who signed it, it was the international scouting director. So I said to myself, this must be real. So, of course, I wrote him back and told him, of course, I'd like to scout. I'd love to. And sure enough, in a couple of days, I had a contract in the mail. So that's how it started.
What a story. So your friend was not working for the Reds. So then why the Reds?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
Why did you pick Cincinnati out of all the teams?
Because my friend was coaching for them. And I was more or less coaching. Yeah, I was writing him more than I was the Reds. So I didn't really pick the Reds, so to speak. I was just communicating with my friend.
The Reds then picked you.
Yeah, something like that.
So is it safe to say that you are the only professional baseball scout based in Israel?
I think so, yes.
And so what does your job entail as an international scout? What's your territory? Take us through a typical season.
Sure. So my territory is, I'm with the European group of scouts, and now I must insert in here that because of COVID, all international scouting has been frozen this year. And we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but that's a whole other conversation we can get to. So basically my territory was defined as Europe. However, the first place I went for the Reds was Taiwan. And then shortly thereafter, I went to Uganda. And then I went to South Africa. So it was a while before I got to Europe. But I did coach on Ireland's national baseball team there. So I was in Europe for a big tournament every summer, and I got to see 7 or 8 different national teams play at the senior national team level. So I always kept an eye out for that, and I was able, after one of the tournaments, to actually host a showcase event where I'm looking at prospects from any of the teams who were there, and any of the national teams could stay an extra day, take part in this, and that was a big charting journey. I'm charting every player, their times, their speeds, looking at their arm, their bat, etc. Mm-hmm. So that's my territory.
So I've got many questions from that, but let's talk about charting. Let's talk about what you look for when you're at the ballpark in a player. How do you analyze? How do you judge them?
Each major league team has its own set of what they want you to look for. So for example, the Reds really like very athletic persons. So with the Reds, I'm looking for somebody who runs really well, who has good hand-eye coordination, and could play a number of different positions. And again, the Reds really like third and first baseman. They like to look at the corners in terms of drafting higher up. You'll see the Reds drafted a lot of third baseman and first baseman in the past few drafts. So that's what I'm looking for, somebody who is very athletic. I'm looking at their speed in terms of just straight ahead running speed to first base. And then on the base paths, I want to look at how they conduct themselves. I'm going to take a look as well for the typical, what we call the 5 different areas that you're looking for pretty much in any player in scouting over the past 100 years. You're looking for somebody who, when they hit a baseball, hits it with authority consistently. You're looking for somebody who runs well. You're looking for somebody who's got a strong and accurate arm. You're looking for somebody who mentally seems like they're on top of the game and really has a lot of desire. And that's usually taking place with conversations that I'll have with the player or with their teammates or with their family or with their girlfriend. It's a lot of detective work in that particular area, talking to their coaches as well. So all of that I'm looking at. And generally speaking, I'll take a look as well at press clippings of the player. I'm looking for statistics that they're on. There's certain statistics that are meaningful, others not so much. But I'm doing a lot of detective work in that area as well. Those are all the things I'm looking at.
So the player can't fool you athletically. What you see on the field is what you're going to get. But when you're scouting in a Taiwan or a Uganda, there's a language barrier there. So how do you address those issues, talking to the player, getting to know him and the family?
So for example, in Taiwan, I'm looking at a pitcher from Japan, actually, who was pitching in Taiwan. Didn't speak a word of English, and certainly not a word of Hebrew. And my Japanese is limited to about 4 words. So he had an interpreter there. It was a heads up move by him. He really wanted to get looked at and signed. So obviously that took all the problems away. Other scouts that I'm with, and oftentimes there'll be maybe 10 or 12 Major League Baseball scouts watching a certain player at a certain time, especially if they're at a showcase event. And we actually talk to each other, and that helps us a lot. So for example, I didn't understand something that was being said, somebody else there did. We'll share that kind of information. That's certainly not going to cause any problems between us. It can be a problem. In Uganda, for example, English is the second language of everybody. And therefore, everybody speaks a fair bit of it. And at the high school, I was looking at certain players and there you see a clip of the Ugandan players right there. Everybody spoke some English, and the headmaster was a native English speaker, so there really weren't any problems. And their coach as well, who coached that team, was an English speaker. Absolutely no problems.
So I don't think many of people in our audience, myself personally, I do not associate Uganda and baseball. So how was baseball like there? How are people taking to the sport? What's it like?
Well, first of all, let me tell you how I ever found out about baseball there. The Ugandan Little League team beat the Dominican Republic's team. And the Dominican Republic, and this is about 6-7 years ago, the Dominican Republic is considered, right, and rightfully so, as one of the baseball powers in the world in terms of raising talent. And so the Cincinnati Reds wanted to know, are these kids in Uganda real? Are they really good players? They'd never heard of them either. There hadn't been a Major League Baseball scout ever in Uganda, so I was the first one ever to set foot there. However, Jimmy Rollins of the Philadelphia Phillies had gone there and had hosted some baseball clinics. So there was a program there, and the question was, are they real? Did they win by a fluke? And the Reds really wanted to find out. So they sent myself and an associate from scout as well, from Germany, who scouts in Europe, a colleague of mine with the Reds. We both went there for about a week. We sat in tall grass and hot sun and watched these kids play. And they were really, really impressive. And I mean, this is like, I think one of Uganda's nicknames is the jewel of Africa, but it's kind of a hidden jewel. You never really see it much, especially if you're from Israel like I am. Uganda has kind of a negative association due to politics from the 1970s. But anyhow, yeah, I was impressed by what I saw. And the kids were for real. One of them now, the guy in the clip who you saw pitching, his name's Lawrence Zingi, is a scholarship baseball player for a D2 program, I think, in New Jersey.
Wow.
So that's the first Ugandan player to go to the States and play ball. He was kind of the star of the players that we saw 5 years ago. So hopefully they can continue that pipeline.
And I'm sure the Ugandan people, they were very appreciative of the Reds for sending 2 scouts to the country, legitimizing, the efforts that they're making.
Yes, they were. Everybody that I met, from the people at the hotel we stayed at, knew that we were there for that reason, to the people at the school where the workouts were taking place were very grateful. They were very, very warm. They especially were interested in why I would even want to come, being that I was from Israel. Again, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
I forgot what I was going to say, but go ahead.
No, but to my point, they were very appreciative of you being there and you helping, lift up the program a little bit. Hopefully, it inspired future Ugandans to pick up a ball and bat.
I hope so. Interestingly enough, the Minister of Sports for the entire country came for a day to watch what was happening. So even he found out about it. There we go. He's in the middle there. Mr. Omada was his name. Between myself on the left and Alper Boskert, the German scout, on the right. So Mr. Omada came, and he was very grateful that we came. And in fact, he was the one who asked me about what's it like coming from Israel to Uganda after our past kind of spotty history. But anyhow, yes, I found everybody very warm and very, very enthusiastic that Major League Baseball would have anybody coming to Uganda to look at their baseball progress. Right now, the Los Angeles Dodgers have invested some money and some coaches who are in Uganda full time in order to help develop the program. So that's what they needed, was Major League Baseball to put some investment into them to grow the game, and it looks like they've got it going now.
That's awesome.
Yes.
So let's bring this back to a major league level. Take us through the scouting department and the process from when you look at a player for the first time up until draft day. I know it takes over many years. It could be at a very young age, through high school, through college, but give us the Coles Notes of it.
Sure. Well, the first thing that's going to happen in my context, this is not the way the domestic scouting works, only international, is that somebody in Europe is going to see somebody who looks like they have potential. And what he'll do is chart him. He's going to look at certain stats, etc. And then he'll take some video clips of him and send them to all of the other European scouts. So we all look at someone together, which is different than domestic. Again, we work as a team in Europe. And quite a bit of what we do is just looking at these clips and critiquing them, and then getting back to each other about what we see and whether we think the person is worth following. So once that is done, we compile a list every year of the 40 top prospects in Europe. And we're consistently assessing that list. What we'll try to do is at every June, because the international draft was taking place in July. Again, this year there wasn't one because of COVID. But every June, we will take those 40 players, and then we're going to try to agree on the top 5 between all of us. Mm-hmm. There's about a dozen of us scouts in Europe with the Reds. So we try to find the top 5. And then we list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of, we think it's best to draft this guy first. Here's why. We think it's best this person second. Here's why. And we'll let the international scouting department back in Cincinnati know about it, and they'll take it from there. Typically, on average, I think 4 European players per year, and this is on average again, so it's not that accurate of a stat, but get signed or that is drafted into Major League Baseball. So we would maybe sign 1 a year. That was probably, and we were one of the more, I can't exactly use the word aggressive, but we were one of the more favorable teams for signing European players. For example, I'm trying to think of his name. Najadar Latifa was a player from Turkey who was playing in Europe and was signed, I want to say about 5 years ago. Made it all the way up to, I think, single A baseball before he was released. But that's very typical. I mean, he was looked at for a number of years. Our German scouts found him. They put him through the baseball academy in Germany that they have. So he went to high school there and studied and played baseball, basically. And then they thought he's big, strong, he's getting better all the time. They signed him, and he went to play minor league baseball in the States. After, of course, we ran it through the international scouting department, and they agreed that he seemed to have that kind of potential. So that's typically what it might look like.
So you mentioned that there were 12 scouts that you're with in Europe. Do the Reds, have a higher investment in European baseball, international baseball, or are you on par with the rest of the league?
There are certain teams that seem to be invested more in international baseball. And I'm talking outside of the Caribbean now, because the Caribbean, obviously, and correctly so, gets most of the attention in international scouting. So, for example, almost every scouting event I was at, there was a scout there from the Dodgers. They're very active in that. There's a scout there from the Red Sox. There's a scout there from the Yankees. The Minnesota Twins are very active in international scouting. And then there's ourselves. Did I mention the Red Sox? I think I did.
Yep.
Those would be the teams that are typically I'm going to find everywhere. The Oakland A's, surprisingly, for a small market team, seem to have their eyes as well very much in Europe. The Seattle Mariners were very active scouting, and those would be the main teams, I think, where I saw scouts. There are some teams that I never saw their scouts in Europe. I don't know why. Houston Astros also were very active. But a team like the Detroit Tigers or the Chicago White Sox, I never saw scouts from them in Europe. So it's kind of interesting, the question that you're asking, because there's a real perspective that each major league team has on where they want to be scouting. You'll find the Tigers and the White Sox quite active in the Caribbean, and I think for them that's the major place they want to put their efforts into scouting. Whereas a team like the Yankees or Dodgers, you'll find them everywhere.
You can make an argument for both. The teams like the Yankees, the Dodgers, with such deep pockets, they can put a scout probably in every major city in the world. But
Right.
Then again, you mentioned the A's or the Rays, the small market teams. You think they'd want to be in these very small countries to try and find the diamond in the rough and turn someone into the next big thing.
Yes, you would. And unfortunately, this year sent everything backwards, and as far as that goes, because of COVID. Because once again, I'm hoping that European baseball can recover from what the effects of COVID will be. A totally shut down European baseball this summer.
So talk to us a little bit about that. Tell us about how COVID has impacted not only your job, but baseball in your neck of the woods.
Sure. So European baseball, typically you have leagues within a country. So that's the domestic leagues. And usually we don't watch them all that much unless you're stationed in that country or living there. But it's the international tournaments that take place at the end of every summer that we really keep our eyes on, because they're the national teams, they're the stars of the country, best players there who are going to get together. And almost all the scouting that takes place is going to focus on those 6 or 7 tournaments from various age groups in various places. And with them not taking place at all, I mean, it really shuts down scouting totally. I still scout a bit in Israel. There are 2 guys I've been keeping my eyes on, but Israeli baseball was shut down this summer as well. And so, how much can you follow somebody when they're not playing at all? And the fact that a player who has been developing his talent, if there's 15, 16, 17, even 18 years old, is going to lose a year of playing baseball to this, is really going to set him back, because a European player typically is a year or maybe more behind an American or Canadian or Mexican or Caribbean-based player. There's just not the time on task that you'll have in the West, as well as the quality of instruction, quality of fields, quality of equipment. And so you're already playing from behind, more or less. You have to, in order to make Major League Baseball from Europe, and that's really what we want to do as scouts. We want to sign only people who we really think have the talent to make it all the way. Someone like a Max Kepler of the Minnesota Twins, you have to be playing ball all the time. You can't lose a year. And so this might set European baseball back a lot in terms of being able to feed into Major League Baseball. And I'm just hoping it won't set European baseball programs back, however.
All understandable. And, we actually, a few weeks ago, we had Ty Kelly on, former Major League Baseball player with the Mets, and he was telling us about how minor league players in general were struggling because the teams that have not guaranteed their salaries, they have nowhere to, get their next paycheck from. And not only just the training, but their whole lives have been set back.
Absolutely. So we're all kind of in that same boat right now. We're hoping for a good bounce back next summer, and I just hope there can be baseball next summer.
So you mentioned, of course, that there are 12 of you in Europe, and it's a very you're together. You're making decisions together. You're looking at talent together. But do you ever have specific instructions from Cincinnati, from the director of international scouting or the general manager, saying, you know what, we're predicting that there's going to be a short fall in outfielders, or we're really lacking a bullpen. We're thinking that's going to happen a few years down the road to really zoom in on those positions?
Usually not. However, I will say that this past 2 years ago, somebody from the Reds organization contacted me personally and said, I really could use a big lefty pitcher. If you see anybody who you think fits the bill, really look hard for him, okay? And so I did, and I found someone, which was really great. But typically speaking, you're not going to do that. Um, our scouting director is very, very up on what it is the front office wants, and he's able to relay that to us. He typically would do that in emails that he sends to us or phone calls, and just let us know what the Major League Club is looking for in terms of stocking the minor leagues. And again, the Reds have a philosophy about that. They want good quality first baseman, third baseman,
Okay.
and of course, every major league team wants a lot of good, talented pitching. So your eyes are always looking for those particular things.
How do current trends in baseball affect how you scout? So let's take the Rays as an example from last year when they blew the lid off baseball with the opener strategy. Do
Mm-hmm.
these changes, these trends, do they affect you and your scouting?
The biggest trend that's affected scouting is the rise of sabermetrics in baseball because typically, and now again, this is changing. So again, this is a big change you're talking about that's happening. I'm old school, meaning I learned how to scout using my eyes and camera that I take video clips of, and consulting other scouts who use their eyes and what they see in video with the camera. And with the rise of sabermetrics now, we're getting, for example, the Houston Astros really use sabermetrics a lot when they're scouting. They're looking for things like exit speed of a ball off a bat. And if you hit a certain level, they're very impressed by a player and want to get a closer look at them. I don't even know how to gauge exit speed. Technically, I couldn't do it with the equipment that I have either. And so when I'm looking at a hitter, I'm looking for other things. And yet this is becoming, I know the Reds front office now has two full-time workers who, including our general manager, who are very up on the meaning of sabermetrics and very much pro using what sabermetrics can tell them about a particular prospect and their chances of improving in a certain area or not, their chances of coming through under pressure or not. Some of the statistics are going to predict things like that. And using my eyes, all I can do is look at particular areas and use 60 years of watching baseball and coaching baseball, 30 years of coaching baseball on top of that, to try and predict if someone can grow or this and that. So it's been amazing to me to watch the growth of sabermetrics. A team like the Oakland A's that began to pioneer that has
Of course.
really they've been a successful team. And so, they'll tell us that sabermetrics has been used in order to build their roster and even the way that they're looking for scouts. So I have to give some respect for that, even though I don't particularly use that. Our European scouts aren't, we tend to be older and tend to have come through the coaching ranks. And so we're very much schooled in using our eyes in our own mental assessments of what we see on the field. So that's one trend that has affected all of Major League Baseball scouting. It hasn't come down to me yet quite, but I'm trying to familiarize myself more with some of the statistics using sabermetrics to see if it can help me. And that's still a work in progress.
So yeah, you mentioned the A's. So we all have read, or some people have seen the movie Moneyball. So
Yeah.
sabermetrics, huge role in the game. Do you think this will adversely affect baseball, that you're going to be shifting away from the old school, the eyes and, the coaching and everything that you grew up on and how you learned to scout? Do you think relying on data will be a downfall eventually?
Well, let me talk more generally first, and I'll get more specific. There are differences of opinion in terms of how much sabermetrics is really going to help baseball in terms of development and scouting. So I will say that I've talked to other scouts who feel negatively about it because they're afraid that baseball is just beginning to miss the human element in the way it's being run, especially now with COVID, that kind of takes some of that human element away. However, personally, now you asked me personally if I think it would harm the game. I don't. I'm looking at what the A's have done, and I'm saying if there's something to this, it should be pursued. And if I was the owner of a team in Major League Baseball, I'd want my club to do anything that they could do in order to put together a great draft, do anything they could do to be able to predict the outcomes that are going to happen. And especially if you have some success at it already from some teams like the Astros and the A's, then I would baseball, and I think all of professional sports tend to be copycat leagues. If something's working for one team, everybody else wants to find out about it and get on board. And I don't think that's harmful at all. The only harmful thing I would think could happen is, again, that some of the human element of baseball gets taken away. One of the more enjoyable features of being a coach is to be able to get to know your player, find out how they're thinking, and then find a way to be able to encourage them to develop who they are in terms of their skill set through your personal relationship. And I think some of the fear is just that the numbers can minimize that kind of a connection, or how a coach can affect a player if the numbers are seeming to say, well, this should be worked on in the player, but the coach thinks something else needs to be worked on, and they're not the same way, then there could be a conflict there. But it'll be interesting to look back in 5 years and see what we think.
Shifting this over to coaching a little bit, we also seen how the analytics are playing a role in shifts, in how players are positioning themselves. I watched a game the other day. There were 4 outfielders, but it looked like the whole infield was in the outfield. So how are those numbers, that data, affecting the game and affecting how you scout? Are you looking at some differences in athletes now, or do you think it will have
Yes,
an effect?
absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I can remember back in about 1969 when the first shifting was being used to defend Harmon Killebrew, because he always hit the ball hard to the left side of the field, whether it was a home run or a line shot or a hard ground ball. And I could remember, people questioning that. Well, what if he just pops the ball to the right side? You're going to be in trouble. Well, he never popped the ball to the right side. So more and more teams began to use what they call the killer shift against power hitters who would hit down their power alley as a main strategy for hitting the ball. And today we do have shifts like that. Gene Mauch of the Philadelphia Phillies and Minnesota Twins was a famous manager who would place outfielders really, really shallow to catch the eye of the batter, to try to get him to hit to the opposite field when the pitcher was pitching him the opposite way. So it would be a really hard thing to do for him. Challenged him, almost dared him to put it there. Mauch loved doing that. And of course, baseball pundits all over criticized him. You're leaving one side of the field wide open. But Mauch could retaliate back. Well, they only hit the ball there very, very few times. So it's kind of, if we look at baseball today, we'll see things like that incorporated in. But I think there's still more of a foundational ideas about how to play baseball that minimize maybe the use of things like that. Unless you get a skipper in Major League Baseball who's absolutely known for being a wild man in terms of his strategy. And typically owners don't like to hire guys like that because it's do or die, and most often it's die if you're being reckless instead of maybe aggressive out there. So I don't mind innovations in the game. I think they're good, and innovations tend to happen when there's some success with using them at first. So again, going back to the Killebrew shift, there was success at using that, and it did seem to cut down at least some of the base hits, perhaps, that a guy like Harmon Killebrew would get on to the left side when you bunch together the third baseman, shortstop, and put the second baseman behind second base. Gene Mauch's strategy as well, it was termed the Fenway fixation, seems to have had some effect. there are crazy things like that that go in and out of the game all the time. You know, what would be really fun is if somebody would write a book about them and analyze how effective they were.
I'll leave that to you in your free time.
Right.
But touching on innovations, we mentioned that this is, of course, a lot of the changes regarding COVID in European scouting, but there have been changes in the Major League game this year. I mean, we've seen 7-inning doubleheaders, extra innings. There's a runner on second.
Right.
What do you think about these new, call it gimmicks, call it innovations? What are your thoughts on them?
I'm sad to have to see them be implemented because it means that something has happened, which of course we know again is COVID, and it's forced us to have to deal with part of the game. So, for example, the wearing of the masks and the social distancing, and still players getting sick is a real unfortunate thing that's been happening. And so, clubs are trying to adjust to it by doing certain things. In terms of the runners starting from second base and playing it from there, that's a real change from the way from the baseball that you and I grew up with, especially that I grew up with. I don't know how I feel about it, Daniel. I haven't seen it be really a positive part of the game. I do know that in our European tournaments, we do things like that, and it tends to speed up the game. One of the things I think Major League Baseball always has to do is see what the fans like and don't like, and what makes fans come to games and what tends to keep fans away. The length of games these days is much longer than it used to be. And of course, we all know why. There's a lot of pitchers that might enter a game as opposed to maybe 50 years ago when it was expected that your starter is going to try to go all 9 innings. So you don't have all the visits and the time taken warming up and changing pictures, et cetera, et cetera. Fans didn't seem to really like that, the time. A typical game now might be 2.5 to 3 hours or more. Whereas back when I was growing up, we'd expect, 2 hours, 50 minutes, 2.5 hours maximum to be at a game. So these kinds of things are being used, I think, to try and put some excitement into the game, to get the ball rolling, if I can use the term, quicker, faster, harder, and especially to get young kids and youths wanting to look at baseball and going to the games and watching on television.
I know something that at least has excited me is the expanded playoffs. I don't know if it'll only be this season or they might want to take it further, but for the smaller market teams, the Reds, for example, I mean, outside chance they can make the playoffs this year just because, well, it's a shortened season, but there are more spots up for grabs.
Mm-hmm. Right. I like expanded playoffs. I think the major league owners did as well, which is why they went to it. It does put more excitement into things. It lets fans from other places who might not have made it in any other type of playoff outside of expansion get involved. It generates enthusiasm in those cities. And, one of the wonderful things about baseball, I think, is that you can just get hot suddenly. And you could actually go to the World Series and win it, like the 1987 Minnesota Twins did, who I think finished 5 or 6 games above 500. That was it. But they won their division because everybody that year was under 500. And doggone it, they went and beat the big Detroit Tigers, and off they went, and they beat St. Louis, who had a much better record than they did as well. So when you're allowing a team that has barely got its head above 500 to make the playoffs, again, it generates excitement. I know the players get excited about it, and sometimes that can get them performing really well as they realize they have a second chance, and the whole baseball world gets excited. Now, if you're a team that had a good record, you might feel negative about that, but I'm going to agree with you there. I like that.
So how much pressure is there on David Friedman to help the Reds win their first World Series since 1990?
Well, absolutely none. Not this year, certainly. Not a lot. I think I'm more concerned with just trying to identify the top baseball players in Europe. That's really my job. And it's up to the International Scouting Department and the Cincinnati Reds front office to take it from there. I'm just a set of eyes for them in Europe and in Africa. And for me, I'm very happy doing that. It's exciting for me. I don't work full time at it. I mean, it's a part-time job, and this year it's really even less than that. So but with the time I do get to put into it, it's like living my childhood fantasy. I love baseball. I love working with young men, coaching them, and then I also love scouting. So I don't look at it so much as pressure. It's more joy, really. I'm just happy being involved in the game at the major league level. So it's a love of mine. So it really feels to me more like not so much work is fun, joy, and working for people who I never thought I'd ever get a chance to be part of.
It's absolutely awesome. Before we let you go, and of course, thank you so much for your time. You've been incredibly
Of course.
generous jumping on the show with us. I got to quote you from your bio. You're the president of the Israeli National Baseball League, and in brackets, brand spanking new league. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. We feel like baseball can grow at the grassroots level in Israel. I mean, it's baseball plays seventh or eighth fiddle in terms of popularity of the sport in the country. Israel is a soccer country. Basketball is popular. Now we have an Israeli basketball player who is going to be drafted in the NBA draft. Um, Swimming is popular. Kayaking and judo, we've won gold medals in the Olympics as of recent days. So baseball, even with the World Baseball Classic participation, and even with Israel is going to have an Olympic baseball team this next year, it hasn't really caught in terms of being a grassroots game. There aren't a lot of youth involved in the game. And our league in particular wants to promote the game for kids who are 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old up through high school, because that's really where the foundation of the game is built. And if you have a strong program there, baseball is going to grow. If your program's weak there, the game isn't going to really grow. So we have identified that as the most needed area of growth. So there are 7 of us on the board of directors who got together. We've all been friends. Some of us have coached together in the past, including one minor league baseball player, or 2 actually minor league baseball players of the past, and decided, why don't we start a league, and we're going to just try to promote the growth with the kids. So right now we're in our fundraising mode, but we did get approval from the state of Israel, as well as we're a 501c3 in the States, which sets us up for a fundraising mode now. So hopefully we can get on the ground for next summer and organize something to take place there.
Awesome. So if someone from Maccabi Canada or the JCC wanted to get involved, how can we help? Tell us.
Well, donations. That's probably the most helpful way. In terms of helping the country of Israel in baseball, most of what has to happen in Israel. But part of the problem, and this will help answer your question when I get around to the answer here. Part of the problem with sports in Israel is that a typical Israeli young man at age 18, no matter what sports he loves, has to put in 3 years in the army. And then when you get out of that, you're pressured. You have to get your education, collegiate or post-secondary, and then you get into a job, maybe get married, and sports is done with. Mm-hmm. So baseball needs to happen when someone is really young. And I don't know how you can help with that, but I think, again, that our league, for example, realizes that, and that's why we exist. We want to help that happen. So to me, that's the biggest way that baseball is going to grow in Israel. Something has to happen for young kids when they are in school to realize, okay, there isn't just soccer that I can sign up with and be involved with. It isn't just swimming or basketball, but baseball does exist. And, we do have youth teams in Israel, but again, it just hasn't caught on like I'd like to see it do so. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Aliyah would help. The more American, Canadian, and Mexican, Jewish people we have immigrating to Israel, baseball is going to be carried by them. And that's how baseball got to Israel to begin with, is just by sons and daughters of American immigrants who come and know what a wonderful game it is. And you don't want to give that up ever. So you do your best to try and build the sport up in the homeland.
Of course. So I guess one of my last questions for you, as someone with 60 years experience as a fan, as a coach, what are some tips you can give the young athletes watching tonight?
Well, especially perhaps the Canadian athletes who really love baseball. Baseball to me is a game of having to put physical skills together with mental ones. So as much as you can practice the basic skills of the game with somebody who's a good coach helping you out is what's going to help you grow the most, as well as game experience. So if you're a young player and you would like to try and advance in the game, that's what I would suggest, that you do as much practicing as you can, hands-on task, get a good coach, like a hitting coach, or if you're a pitcher, a pitching coach, to help work with you, put in the time, give it all you've got, and as far as you go is great. You don't have to make it to the major leagues for baseball to have an impact in your life. I never played Major League Baseball, but baseball has impacted my life very much. It's taught me many life lessons, and those you'll have to find by yourself. But I'd like to share one with you, if you don't mind. I know I'm rabbit trailing off your question here, but I was coaching in a Little League championship game once, way back in 1990, and this was in Minneapolis when I was back on a sabbatical. And my team in the title game had a player who went, I think it was 0 for 4, 0 for 5, and he usually hit pretty well. And he just was having a rough day. But at the end of the game, he made a diving catch that helped save the game so that our team could win. He came up after me. I think he was 8 years old. He comes up to me after the game and he goes, "Coach, I couldn't do it with the bat tonight, but if I can't do it with the bat, I can do it with the glove." Now, for an 8-year-old to say something like that, this is a lesson you can take with you for the rest of your life, basically meaning if you can't get your goal doing one thing, find another way to do it. You don't have to be stuck on one way. So like for him, in order to contribute to this championship game, he didn't have to go 4 for 4 and knock in 5 RBIs. All he had to do was play good defense, and that would help contribute, and that's what he did. And I was very proud of him for being able to say that, realizing that at 8 years old. And again, there's a life lesson you can take with you.
That's an incredible story, and I think that's a fitting way to end this. So, David, thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, David Friedman, he is the only professional baseball scout to be based in Israel. Before every tournament, he visits the Western Wall, puts a little note in there, and hopes for some success.
Indeed. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate being on.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.